I think I'm going to go ahead and get started. We can let some students trickle in here, but anyone that has their video off, I would encourage you to turn that on just so that we can have some interactions with our fellows. I would love to thank the fellows for coming tonight. And I'm really excited about this event. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Nicole Pompilio. I am the Student Programs Manager at the Dornsife Center for the Political Future, and I help run the Poli-Sci 395 course. So I am here with our Poli-Sci 395 students that will be able to ask some career questions about the reality of working in politics to our incredible fellows this semester. Just for some 395 announcements for you students, I wanted to re-emphasize that this is a workshop, so you do not need to do a political event write-up on this, but this is required for your course, so thank you for attending. If you want to attend any of those political events, you can also do through the center. Any of our other fellows events are political events that you could do a write-up for, so if you really enjoy this, please attend those. And our next workshop is March 30th at 4:30, and it is a panel with some USC alumni. So just wanted to let all the students know that, but I will hand it over to Harry, our fellows manager.
Thanks, Nicole. As Nicole mentioned, my name is Harry Burke. I am the fellows manager here at the Center for the Political Future, for those of you that don't know me. And I will really quickly just introduce our fellows. And then from there, we can get started with the conversation. So I'll start with Barbara Comstock. Barbara is a former Republican congresswoman from the great state of, or Commonwealth, excuse me, of Virginia. She was also a member of the House of Delegates there, and she has a long career of herself being a staffer in politics, all the way up to herself being a principal. So she's got a wide range of experience in the field from different perspectives. Shaniqua McClendon is the political director of Crooked Media, who herself also has a wide-ranging viewpoint from the world of politics. She also worked in Capitol Hill for Senator Kagan and Congresswoman Alma Adams. And then we also have Todd Purdum, who is a longtime journalist for all the way back to the Clinton years, and worked for a long time for the New York Times, Vanity Fair, The Atlantic, and a bunch of other publications, has written a few books as well. So these are our fellows, and we're gonna just start off with a quick about 25-minute conversation with myself and Nicole moderating. And I'm gonna start off with the first question, which is, I'm gonna direct this to, let's go Barbara, then Shaniqua, then Todd. And really, I just wanna start off with, if you guys could tell us a little bit about yourself and your history for our students who haven't met you yet. So what or why were you drawn to a career in politics? I'll start.
Great. Well, good evening. Great to be with you. When I was in third grade, my mom, who was a teacher and educator, sort of an activist herself, brought me to Washington, D.C. and to Williamsburg, Virginia. And I got the bug then and understood sort of that, if you can see things that are wrong and you can try and fix them. So I always wanted to sort of go into doing something in politics. I ended up going to law school and being a lawyer. So when I got out of law school, I worked on Capitol Hill. I became a chief counsel on a committee. Then I got recruited to work on a presidential campaign. I did several of those. Worked at the Justice Department as head of public affairs. And then went to a law firm, sort of the last thing that I was, not as interested in doing. Like that, if you're a lawyer, you think you want to go to a law firm, but I did go to that for a while, enjoyed it. But then started my own government affairs practice. Then I accidentally got recruited to run for office. And that was sort of a 10-year detour. Instead of helping the other candidates get elected, I was doing it myself. And then I was in the State House for 5 years and in Congress for 4. And so with running for office, that was a decade. And now I am at a law firm once again, and also run a women's leadership program George Mason University, and my class is focused on women in leadership roles, and that's a passion of mine that I continue to work on because I realized once I was elected how few women there were, particularly Republican women. So that has been something I continue to work on several boards now to get more women and more diverse women elected to office. So great to be with you.
Hi, everyone. Also really excited to be with you all today. I got interested in politics after, basically when I was in college. I figured I could have, if I majored in business, I could make a lot of money. I grew up in a single parent household with 2 sisters, and we did not have a lot. So I figured I'll just get a lucrative job and I can make a ton of money after college. But as you get older and start to understand the way the world works, I started to understand that I didn't grow up poor because we were special. You know, a lot of people were in tough positions, and you could trace a lot of those tough situations to decisions that were happening in our government. So I figured instead of just helping myself, I could try to help a lot of people by going to work in public policy. I started working on the Hill in 2010 in August, right before the Tea Party swept in that November, and over the next couple of cycles. And, you know, needless to say, there was a lot of gridlock on Capitol Hill during my 6 years on the Hill. But I still would not trade that experience for the world. I got to work on a lot of the policies I was interested in, particularly education policy. But when I left Capitol Hill, I went to graduate school. I planned on getting out of politics, but then Donald Trump won my first semester in graduate school. So I made a decision that I could either go work in a different industry and be obsessed with politics, or I could just stay in politics and kind of utilize the skill set that I had developed. And so when I decided to come to Crooked, a big part of that was I knew that there were policies I wanted to see passed on Capitol Hill, but we were going to need different kinds of politicians if I was ever going to see those. So I decided to get into kind of get away from policy and work on the political side to help get people elected. And that is how I ended up at Crooked. And now I'm pretty sure I will stay in politics for probably all of my career.
Hi, well, I'm unlike Shaniqua and Barbara, I'm not courageous enough to actually be in politics. I just have spent most of my career writing about the people who are. I'd worked in journalism in high school and college. And in college, I was the campus correspondent for the New York Times, where I went to work after graduation as a copy boy, which is a glorified, not so glorified gopher, carrying around pieces of paper and fetching coffee and doing errands and buying theater tickets and all kinds of things that were not actually journalism. But in my spare time, the goal was to write stories for the paper and get them in. And when I became a reporter, I had a pretty typical career path. I was sent to cover the police, and then City Hall and state and local government. And then I was sent to Washington to cover the delegation there. So I had over the years a lot of wonderful teachers, including Ed Koch and Mario Cuomo, who was governor of New York, and Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who was the senior senator from New York. And they taught me a lot about how government can work or not work. And then I went to cover the White House in the second 2 years of the first term of Bill Clinton. Then I came out to Los Angeles to run the Times office here for a little more than 4 years and went back to Washington, covered the George W. Bush administration, the 2004 campaign. In 2006, I went to Vanity Fair, where I mostly wrote long profiles of politicians, including John McCain, Karl Rove, the Bush's father and son, Sarah Palin, and so on. And in the almost 40 years I've been doing this, I've witnessed an enormous number of changes in both the way politics gets covered, the way people get elected, the kinds of people who are drawn to politics, the kinds of cooperation that happens or doesn't happen in Washington. And I have to say that, if you plotted it on a trajectory, it wouldn't be a steadily improving trajectory. It would be one that has been somewhat the reverse, in fact. And I think that, the place we find ourselves in right now in the intersection of politics and the media is a fairly depressing one. There's mutual distrust on both sides. There's distrust of both institutions by the public. But I think the paradox of that is that, searching journalism and effective public service are needed more than ever. Those two institutions are naturally skeptical of each other and naturally somewhat adversarial. but they don't have to be oppositional. They don't have to be at war. And I think history shows that our country has often best been served when those institutions work to hold each other accountable and to be honest with each other and have a frank, kind of relationship back and forth. And in my lifetime, there were times in Washington when that was so. And I think that we need to try to figure out how we can reestablish, first of all, a basic set of facts that people can agree on, and a basic way of looking at the world that, you can have your own opinion, as Senator Moynihan famously said, but you're really not entitled to have your own facts. And I think we've strayed pretty far from that. And how we get that toothpaste back in the tube, I'm not sure. But in my case, I've certainly seen a lot of wonderful public servants over the years, and I've seen a lot of very talented journalists. And I would like to hope that I haven't seen the last of them.
Awesome. Okay, thank you for that. We sort of wanted to ask some questions about relationship building and how that has affected your career. So specifically mentors. So how do you go about finding mentors in politics? And if you had a mentor at the beginning of your career or now, or in what ways did they help you and have helped you along the way? And any of you can start. Maybe we'll go with Shaniqua.
Okay. Yeah, I don't think I would have much of the success I've seen in my career without mentors and a network in general. Goodness, so many ways they've been helpful. I guess I can start with just helping me in the jobs that I've had. When I started on the Hill, I had only interned at the White House for 5 months before that, and actually had very little political experience. People were throwing around terms like the CR, and I was just like, I don't know what a CR stands for. Like, what is that and what does it mean? And being able to rely on people who wouldn't, make fun of me or judge me, but understood that I was trying to learn and trying to do a good job, and could kind of fill in the gaps on what I didn't know. But something I always like to talk about a lot when I talk about mentors or peer mentors, on the Hill, it is hard to get a mentor that is like a chief of staff or legislative director when you're a staff assistant, because everyone is extremely busy. The higher up you go, the busier those folks are. But the people that I relied on the most were my peers in other offices. Even when I became a legislative director, I had just come over from the Senate. I didn't know much about the House, about procedure over there. And I, was like, okay, I have to figure this out. And I went to other legislative directors to get a better understanding of how things work. And I often find that helpful because people who are not far removed from your experiences can often have a better sense of how things operate at that time, and give you really helpful insights. But that doesn't diminish the value of having more experienced folks. When I was transitioning to the House side, so the reason I went to the House side is because my senator boss lost her reelection and I was trying to find a new job. And that is, I think at that point, that was when I realized how valuable or invaluable my network and my mentors were. I wanted to stay within the North Carolina delegation, which, I should have been grateful to just have a job on the Hill after Democrats lost all those seats. But I was able to go to my mentors and say, hey, like, I really do want to stay within my home state delegation. Can you help me? And they went to work. They, I had this kind of outside lobbying campaign to get the job that I got in the Congresswoman's office, but it was due in large part to the network that I had developed and the relationships I had built. And one last piece of advice I would offer is, no matter your stature or position, never underestimate that someone that you mentor or have the opportunity to just be kind to, and even if you can't help them, someday they may be hiring you. And so as far as relationship building goes, just don't burn any bridges. And even if you don't like someone, try to at least keep it professional, because you never know who will be on the hiring end of the table.
Barbara?
Sure. I was, when I went to work on Capitol Hill, I was older at that point. I was like, my early 30s, and I had gone to law school, had 3 kids at that point. So now I was going in as sort of just a staff level job. And so I really made a point of just kind of getting around to, like, if there was a speaker somewhere at a think tank on an issue I was working on, or there was a reporter or columnist who was writing about things that I was interested in or working on, I would go hear them speak. I would try and, anything I could get to sort of just meet more people and get engaged, because I had, been home for a few years while I went to law school and had the babies. So my first week on Capitol Hill as a staffer, which I actually got that job from just volunteering on the campaign. While I was home, I just go and work for my local congressman as a volunteer. But I met a woman who was at a think tank. She went on to then be on TV, on a news show, wrote for a news magazine. And she was about 10 years older than I was, had kids who were a little older than I was. So she had sort of done everything I was sort of interested in doing and sort of had the same sort of worldview. And I just latched onto her that first week. And God bless her, she was a wonderful mentor and, introduced me to a lot of different people. And she was somebody who really kind of just kept passing it on. And because of that, I really enjoy doing that myself, because I realized how fortunate I was to have somebody like that who had so many great experiences and had such great judgment. And I would call her for so many, when I was trying to decide which job should I take, what should I go and do next, how should I deal with a situation at work? And she was always such a great sounding board. So I think finding somebody who sort of is, even if they're not exactly where you want to be, but sort of has a worldview similar to yours, interests that are similar. And in this case, she also, had children and was kind of working and juggling things in the same way I was. And it was just very helpful. And then also pass it on yourself and help people. That's why I started my Young Women's Leadership Program back, I guess about 10 years ago when I was in the State House, because I wanted to help mentor young people, because I realized how lucky I was. Not everyone's going to be as lucky to, get this great mentor. And so we want to put young women in high school and junior high in touch with mentors at a young age and seek them out. And you realize, you just go, I met people by just kind of walking up. Hey, I read your column, or I saw you on TV commenting on this. I really enjoyed that. I think the same. What do you think about this? And ask them genuine questions. And that made for a lot of relationships and mentorships, both male and female, just by being kind of passionate about what you're doing and seeking out other people who, have already done what you've done. And then whenever you get a job, if you can find the person who had the job before you, call them up and talk to them and ask them, hey, I know you had this job, or I know you worked here. How, can you give me some ideas? Because usually people who, moved up want to help you be successful, because there's a shortage of great talent. And if you can help people be successful, particularly, if you care about the things you're working on, you will have, a better farm team out there working on the things that matter to you.
Well, as a journalist, you have to have kind of two sets of mentors or sponsors or supporters or teachers, the people at your place of work, and then also the sources that you develop over time and who learn to trust you and vice versa. At the Times, I had a couple of really important mentors who I think neither one of them, they're so generous, they don't really consider themselves to have been my mentors. But one was Anna Quinlan, who's now mostly known as a novelist, but then she was a columnist and editor at the paper. And during a period when I had a tryout to see whether I could make it as a reporter, she was the acting head of the Metropolitan desk, the city desk, the local desk. And she very quietly helped me in a very calm way with my assignments. And I'll never forget, there was one day when I was covering a very depressing story about a sexual abuse scandal at a daycare center in the Bronx. And as the afternoon went on, Anna very calmly came over and kept asking me a series of questions, and she was very relaxed about it. And then finally, like a couple of hours later, she came and said, your story's on page 1. And I realized that what she had been doing was passing on questions from the higher up editors who wanted to know the details of the story, but she hadn't come and panicked me and said, there's a lot of interest in this. You got to tell me what's going on. She just very matter of fact said, what's the latest on this? And it was, incredibly generous of her and very reassuring. Another mentor was a different sort of personality. He was a very scary guy. I was his clerk. His name was Alan Siegel, and he was the news editor. He eventually became something called the standards editor. And he was the man who was in charge of all the ethics and the grammar and the style. And he also ran the desk that was the nerve center of the newsroom. So like the bridge of the ship. And he knew everything about how the paper was put together, from the physical production to the ad sales, to the news space, to the grammar and copy editing and the judgments of news. He'd been one of the editors of the New York Times' coverage of the Pentagon Papers. And most people found him very scary, and I found him scary at times too, but he was also very generous, and in quiet ways, just by watching him uphold the standards of the place, I learned more than I ever could have learned from almost anybody else, because frankly, he knew more than almost anybody in the newsroom about how it really worked. And then when I started covering politics, there were people on the staff of the mayors at City Hall, or later congressmen and senators in Washington, or at the White House. People, often I got to know them when they were young. They were maybe my age or just a little bit older. And as we rose up through the ranks together, I would get more responsible jobs and they'd get more responsible jobs. And, now one of those people is the Secretary of State. And, my wife, who has spent her life in politics, used to joke that if you carried the mult box, the little, the audio visual common thing that runs the microphones at a speech in the first campaign of somebody, you could be a cabinet officer by the end of the second campaign, because there's so much, churn. But both Shaniqua and Barbara make the point that it's really, first of all, it's just good manners, but it's very strategically important to be nice to people on your way up, because they'll be nice to you. And I've tried to be generous to people coming up behind me, because I'll never forget the kindness and generosity other people showed me. And finally, to Shaniqua about the CR, which by the way means continuing resolution, it is a dodge when they don't want to have to really pass a budget or appropriation. There's no shame in not knowing something. The shame is in making a dumb mistake because you're afraid to ask. And this was a lesson taught to me by a gruff older reporter at the Times in the business section when I was a very young reporter. And he told me how when he was a young reporter on Wall Street, and he'd go to a news conference and people would be spouting all this financial jargon and he wouldn't understand something, no one would ask a question, but he'd finally, in just desperation, raise his hand and say, "Excuse me, what do you mean when you say?" And he'd notice every other reporter immediately take out their pad and began writing down the answer. And they didn't know either, but they were too embarrassed to ask. So, it's good to ask. And in some ways, as a reporter, it's your job to be dumb and get educated as quickly as you can. And it's hard to keep going back to people. I mean, I remember, especially as a younger reporter, there were times when I'd go back to the person over and over and over again in the same afternoon to make sure that something was clear. And maybe they thought I was stupid, but if I got it right, or mostly right, I think they were probably, glad that I'd come back to them. Sorry for the long answer.
No worries. Thank you. We have a couple more questions and we'll go to breakout rooms. My mind is surrounding graduate degrees. Real quick, I know for a fact, I know Barbara and Shaniqua obviously have. I'm not sure, Todd, if you went to graduate school, but if you guys could speak to, in politics and journalism, the value of, graduate degrees. I know everybody, I feel like, has that assumption that, to run for office, you need to go to law school or this or that. So I'm wondering what you guys think about the real value of graduate degrees in these fields. So let's start with Todd this time.
Well, I don't have a graduate degree, but I do think there's tremendous value in it. I'd say, as for journalism, the most practical use of a graduate degree is if you did not practice journalism as an undergraduate, working for your college newspaper, or in my case, working for real newspapers covering your college, then the way to get experience that you would need to get hired in a journalistic organization is to go to a graduate school like Columbia or Missouri or Northwestern, the Medill School, or Annenberg here at USC, where you would have the chance to practice the craft, learn the art of reporting, and because there's no substitute for actually doing it. So that to me is the main purpose of a sort of trade school, graduate school for journalism. On the other hand, if you had a law degree, there are tremendous ways in which that could be useful in journalism, whether that's covering the Justice Department or the Supreme Court, or just knowing about the way the law works in general. I knew a lot of journalists at the times who either had some law training or were, in fact, had full law degrees. But for journalism, really the best thing I think most people would agree that you can do is have a vigorous, rigorous liberal arts education and learn about how to find information, whatever that involves, whether it's the 1918 flu pandemic or the COVID-19 pandemic today. And the skills about gathering and verifying and testing that information are much the same. But I'm a big believer for a broad-based education as opposed to some narrow. I mean, if you're interested in journalism and you wanted to major at Annenberg as an undergraduate, more power to you. But I hope you'd also take a lot of history and literature courses at the same time.
Shaniqua, you want to go next?
And I actually have one of my undergrad degrees is in journalism, and I mean, I'm not a journalist, but I will say that having that degree just really helped me working on the Hill with my writing. And we had this news writing class, and factual errors were like 25 or 50 points off of whatever you were writing. And I spelled someone's last name wrong once and got like 25 points off of my assignment. And from then on, like I fact check everything, even how to spell things. So that skill set is definitely very valuable. So I have a graduate degree. Part of the reason I went to graduate school was because I thought it would be a break from like real life. It was definitely different from work, but I would not call it a break in any way. So if that is why you're thinking about going, don't go for those reasons. And you don't need a graduate or advanced degree to work in politics. I think it probably can be useful if you are heavily working in policy, but even then, if you spend enough time with the issue and you know the ins and outs of the law and how it works, it's not absolutely necessary. But politics in general, I went to the Kennedy School, and the things that I actually learned were more around statistics and econ. I can thoroughly read a research study and tell you if it's a quality research study. And maybe this differs at other schools, but I don't think I learned a lot about like political strategy, and that just comes with experience, like being working on a campaign, working in places where you have to make those decisions and getting that hands-on experience. But what I will say is very important and valuable in politics is your network. And that is something that expanded tremendously while I was in graduate school. Not only my classmates, but we had, like we're fellows here, we had fellows at the Kennedy School that I was able to develop relationships with, that if I was in Washington, D.C., these folks would not have made 1 minute of time for me. But when they come to, any school, but in my case, the Kennedy School, they want to spend as much time as possible with the students. And, anything you ask, they are willing to help out with. And I will say, I also took an op-ed writing class, which is it's something, like I enjoy writing. I enjoyed writing before I got to college and was able to hone in on that skill while I was there. But I knew I didn't want to be a journalist who was just kind of reporting on the news. And it was taking that op-ed class in graduate school that kind of got me to a point where I realized, yeah, I like sharing my opinions. And I've been able to do that more, but now have had a bit of training from a really great professor at the Kennedy School, Jeff Seglin. So graduate school is not absolutely necessary, but there's a ton of value in going. I would just don't be like me and take out six-figure debt to get that degree. If you can get scholarships or find a way to go without spending too much money, then I absolutely think it's worth it, even to work in politics.
And I would agree with both of my colleagues here on the value of an undergraduate education and learning, sort of all those basic facts. And I think you all need to know that you're going to need to be lifelong learners. So how you do that and how you add to your education, I don't think it has to be as formalized now as it might have been back when I went. I mean, I did go from college right to law school, but I was also working. And I did, particularly on Capitol Hill, there were a lot of people who worked on Capitol Hill by day and went to law school at night. And I found that if they were young and single, that worked pretty well. I was married and having kids. So it was, I worked after I had the babies, I didn't work as much. But, I think for the young people who were able to do it that way, they end up going that much further in their career at work. They manage their time, and then they end up being able to move right up into higher positions because of that. So I think, you can take off those 3 years if you want to for law school, but I think for a lot of people these days, you can't afford that. I agree with Shaniqua, you don't necessarily get up, gather all that huge debt if you don't have to. I stopped paying my law school debts about the time my 3 children started college. So I had about long decades of paying college tuition. And I think if I were to do, when I talk to young people now, I really encourage them that if you just want to have a law degree to sort of, help with whatever thing you're working on, don't get too obsessed with where you're going to law school, because there are a lot of good bargains. If you get into Harvard or Yale or the top ones, of course you can't resist going, but you don't have to go. Like I went to Georgetown. I love Georgetown, but it was very expensive. George Mason, which is in Virginia, which a lot of kids who worked on Capitol Hill went to, was a lot less expensive. And they really have improved over the years. And I hired a lot of really talented staff from there, and they didn't end up with as much debt. And the other thing with doing it well is I think, you learn how to manage time and do all that, but you also continue to develop those relationships and be in touch with people. So I would see kids who were getting kids, I was older, so but they were going to law school, and then they came out and they were immediately getting a job on Capitol Hill as a counsel. But I think now that lifelong learning, you can do a lot of it, graduate degrees in particular, online. I'd point out that people in politics don't have to have all those graduate degrees. Karl Rove never finished college, famously. I don't know, he still could probably go and get a few classes and he'd do fine. He teaches a master class now in politics. He's taught in a lot of these classes and he never had a college degree. I had a partner who we worked on legal communications together. He didn't have a law degree, but I could tell you sometimes he would know the statutes and the law and the things we were working on better than I did, because he just looked it up and read it. So your undergrad education and learning how to research, read, critical thinking, that's going to enable you to kind of work into a lot of different areas anyway. And then it's just fun learning. I mean, when I was head of public affairs at the Justice Department, I had been a high school journalist. I did write things, but I had not done communications and didn't know sort of that whole world. But I ended up kind of learning on the job and found a deputy who sort of knew a lot of the details more than I did.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we're going to head into our breakout rooms now so that the students can ask all of you some specific questions. So I think Thomas is going to do that for us.